On a gray winter morning in 1921, a lookout on the North Carolina coast raised his spyglass and saw something that should not have existed. A 5-masted schooner, a fast 2 or more masted sailing ship designed for long ocean travel and heavy cargo, drifting silently toward the shoreline, sat high and wrong on the edge of Diamond Shoals, a place sailors called the graveyard of the Atlantic. Her masts were still upright. Some of her sails were still set. From a distance, she looked like she was simply waiting for the wind. But everything else was wrong. She was perched on the shoals like a toy left too close to the water. No signal flags flew from her rigging. No lifeboats hung from her davits. No one stood on deck to wave for help or answer the repeated calls from shore. 4 days, the Coast Guard could only watch from afar as surf hammered the stranded ship. When they finally managed to board her, what they found turned a simple wreck into a legend. Meals were laid out in the galley as if the crew had been about to eat. Bunks were made. Coffee sat waiting. The ship's hull was still mostly intact. There was no sign of fire, no signs of a violent struggle. And not a single human being was anywhere on board. This was the Carroll A. Deering, a brand new American schooner that went to sea with a full crew and came back as a perfectly preserved ghost. Whatever had happened to her people, it hadn't happened slowly. And it hadn't happened on that ship. The ship is intact, the people are gone. The how and why have barely begun. This is the story of the Carroll A. Deering. The tale of the Deering didn't begin with mystery. It began with pride. Launched in 1919 from Bath, Maine, the Carroll A. Deering was a statement piece in an age where sail was already losing ground to steam. She was huge for a schooner, 5 tall masts, a long, sleek hull, and enough canvas to push thousands of tons of cargo up and down the coast. She was named for the son of her owner, Carroll A. Deering, heir to a respected New England shipbuilding family. Inside, everything was new. Clean timbers, polished fittings, updated rigging. Outside, she was unmistakable, a moving forest of masts that dominated any horizon she appeared on. The Deering's job was straightforward: haul cargo, mostly coal, between American ports and foreign buyers. Her final assignment looked like just another line on the calendar: a run from Norfolk, Virginia to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with coal in her hold and a return voyage expected once the cargo was delivered. To command her, the company chose a seasoned mariner, Captain William H. Merritt, a veteran of the sea with a reputation for discipline and competence. His son came aboard as first mate. A multilingual crew, mostly Scandinavian sailors, rounded out the roster. Everything about that crew list said professionalism. On paper, the Carroll A. Deering's last voyage should have been forgettable. A routine journey for a modern sailing ship near the end of the age of sail. If the story had ended there, we wouldn't be talking about her at all. But the cracks in a mystery almost never start where people expect. They start with small changes, tiny misalignments, that only look important once everything else has already gone wrong. A routine voyage is set up, but we already know it doesn't come home that way. Shortly after leaving Norfolk with her coal bound for Rio, the Deering ran into her first serious problem, one that had nothing to do with weather or shoals. Captain Merritt fell ill. Exactly what struck him isn't completely clear from surviving records. Whatever it was serious enough that he couldn't continue the voyage. The Deering diverted to a northern port so Merritt and his son could go ashore and return home. Needing a replacement quickly, the company selected another experienced master, Captain William B. Wormel. He was older, seasoned, and known as a strict but capable commander. He came aboard to take charge of a ship that wasn't originally meant to be his, with a crew that hadn't signed on under him. It's easy to overlook this change. Ships switch captains all the time. But a crew's loyalty, trust, and morale can hinge on who stands on that quarterdeck. Wormel inherited not just a vessel but a set of relationships, cliques among the sailors, habits, tensions he didn't create and couldn't fully read. The Deering continued south and eventually reached Rio de Janeiro, where she discharged her coal. It was there that the first hint of deeper trouble appeared. Other captains later recalled conversations with Wormel in which he complained about his crew. They were unruly, he said. Disrespectful. He didn't fully trust them. There were also reports of tension between Wormel and his first mate, the man who should have been his right hand in a crisis. These were not yet open mutiny or violence, but they were fault lines. From Rio, the Deering sailed north again, stopping at Barbados. But the tension aboard the Deering ran deeper than words left in harbor. Sometime after leaving Barbados, witnesses later said a confrontation erupted on deck. one that stood out even among the earlier complaints. Captain Willis T. Wormel, stern and aging but unmistakably commanding, was seen squaring off against his first mate, Charles B. McClellan. The two men faced each other on the open deck, voices raised above the wind, their silhouettes framed against the towering masts. Wormel, wrapped in his dark peacoat and wool gloves, stood stiff with anger. McClellan, jaw tight and eyes burning with frustration, stepped forward as if refusing an order. Their words were lost to the wind, but the meaning wasn't. A captain and his second-in-command do not argue in front of the crew unless something has gone very wrong. Several sailors watched from the shadows, their expressions unreadable. A few exchanged glances. Others pretended to work, but their eyes kept drifting back to the quarrel. It was the kind of moment that changes the gravity aboard a ship, when authority cracks and everyone feels the shift. Wormel eventually turned away, but the damage was done. Whatever loyalty or discipline still held the Deering together was beginning to fray. And as the schooner pushed north toward the most treacherous coastline on the Atlantic, the lines of command no longer seemed as firm as they once had. There, Wormel repeated his concerns to another captain. The crew was troublesome, he said. The first mate was a problem. He did not sound like a man fully in control of the people under him. No one in Barbados could have known that these complaints would later be read like early warning signs. At the time, they were just words in a harbor. But a ship like the Deering doesn't just need strong sails and a sound hull. It needs a crew that believes in the person giving orders. On the long, dangerous coastline she was sailing toward, that belief might be the difference between order and something else entirely. The captain doesn't trust his crew, and the crew may not trust him. We're heading toward dangerous waters with tension simmering on board. By late January 1921, the Carroll A. Deering was nearing home waters. She had crossed back into the North Atlantic, steering for the U.S. East Coast. Ahead lay a tangle of shoals and shifting sands off North Carolina, one of the most treacherous stretches of coastline in the country. Just off Cape Lookout, a lightship sat anchored in position, acting as a floating lighthouse. Its crew's job was simple: watch the horizon, log every ship that passed, and warn them of danger ahead. On January 29th, Deering hove into view and stood in close enough to hail the lightship. It was routine. Ships often passed messages through lightships. But what happened next was anything but. A man on the Deering shouted across that they had lost their anchors in a storm and needed the Deering Company notified. The message itself wasn't unusual. What bothered the lightship keeper was who gave it. The man shouting wasn't the captain. He wasn't standing where Wormel should have been. According to later testimony, the speaker sounded like a foreign crewman, perhaps one of the Scandinavian sailors. The captain was nowhere to be seen. The keeper also noted that the Deering seemed to be steering an odd course as she disappeared back into the haze, one that didn't match what an experienced skipper might normally choose in those shoal-strewn waters. He recorded the encounter in his log. It was all he could do. That brief exchange, an anonymous crewman giving orders, a missing captain, a peculiar course, would later become one of the crucial puzzle pieces. At the time, it was just a strange footnote in a lightship log. 2 days later, there would be no more voices calling from the Deering at all. Only the sound of breakers and the hollow echo of surf pounding against an empty hull. Someone other than the captain is speaking for the ship, and the next time anyone sees her, she's already a ghost. At dawn on January 31, 1921, a lookout at the Coast Guard station at Cape Hatteras spotted a large schooner hard aground on the outer edge of Diamond Shoals. In the pale light, he could make out 5 masts, tattered canvas, and a hull sitting too high on the sand. He recognized the danger instantly. Diamond Shoals are notorious, a constantly moving labyrinth of sandbars extending far offshore, built by the collision of cold northern currents and the warm Gulf Stream. Tides, storms, and currents shift the bars almost daily, opening and closing channels with no warning. Over the centuries, hundreds of ships had met their end there. Some broke apart in heavy surf. Others simply vanished, leaving only fragments of hull drifting to shore days later. This stretch of coastline has earned its name many times over, the graveyard of the Atlantic. When the lookout realized the grounded schooner was the Carroll A. Deering, the alarm went out. Coast Guard cutters tried to reach her, but the very shoals that had trapped the Deering kept rescuers away. Breaking seas pounded the stranded hull. The risk of grounding another vessel trying to help was too high. 4 days, all they could do was watch her from a distance as the Atlantic slowly worked on her sides. Only on February 4th did the weather calm enough to attempt a boarding. What the Coast Guard found when they finally climbed up her side changed the story forever. The deck was completely deserted. No watch, no officers, no crew. The wheel was damaged. The binnacle, the housing for the compass, was smashed. Below deck, the cabins were empty. The crew's personal belongings were gone or scattered. In the galley, a meal had been prepared and abandoned. Accounts describe food set out, coffee on the stove, everything ready for men who never returned to eat it. On a well-run ship, meals don't simply sit out. Someone cooks, someone cleans, someone is always on duty. This scene looked as if time had been interrupted mid-routine. The ship's navigation instruments were missing. So were the logbook and charts. 2 of the Deering's lifeboats were gone. But there was no sign of frantic damage. No blood, no obvious violence, no hurried chaos. The ship itself, though battered by days on the shoals, still appeared sound enough that no experienced captain would have abandoned her lightly. Whoever left the Carroll A Deering took the tools needed to navigate and the boats needed to escape, and then vanished completely. A neat, deliberate abandonment with no bodies, no distress call, no wrecked lifeboats. This looks like a decision, not a disaster. At first, local speculation leaned toward a grim but simple explanation. The crew had panicked when the Deering struck the shoals, taken to the lifeboats in rough seas, and been drowned or swept away before reaching land. But the more investigators looked, the less that theory held together. Diamond Shoals sit relatively close to the Outer Banks. Lifeboats launched in decent weather could reasonably be expected to make landfall somewhere along that long, low coastline. Coast Guardsmen and local watermen watched those inlets every day. Yet no trace of the Deering's boats or crew ever definitively appeared. No floating wreckage, no bodies, no clothing with her name. And the state of the ship didn't fit blind panic. Food in the galley. Instruments gone. Lifeboats taken cleanly, not smashed off in the surf. This didn't look like reflex. It looked like a plan. The pattern of losses at sea that winter deepened the unease. Other ships, including the steamer Hewitt, had vanished in roughly the same region around the same time. Newspapers began talking about a mystery wave of disappearances. Families demanded answers. In an era already uneasy with prohibition, political unrest, and post-war tension, the idea that ships could simply vanish just off America's own coastline felt like one more thing trembling out of control. The case climbed above the level of local curiosity. Herbert Hoover, then Secretary of Commerce, requested a formal inquiry. Multiple government departments were drawn in. Reports from the Deering, the Hewitt, and other missing or wrecked vessels were laid out side by side, looking for a pattern. What they found were fragments. Weather that didn't quite match a freak storm. Logs that ended too soon. Witnesses with pieces of the puzzle but never the whole picture. It was enough to prove that something strange was happening. It wasn't nearly enough to say exactly what that something was. Panic doesn't fit, storm doesn't fit, and multiple ships are vanishing. We're heading into theory territory, and none of the theories are comfortable. Once it became clear that simple accident didn't explain the Deering, the investigation turned outward, toward hostile human hands. Piracy may sound like a relic of the 1600s, but in 1921 the idea wasn't as ridiculous as it seems. Prohibition had just begun. Smugglers were moving alcohol up and down the coast. Organized gangs were learning how to use the sea to make quick money and avoid the law. A large schooner could, in theory, be seized, its crew forced into boats or onto another ship, then used to move contraband or stripped for valuables. One suspicious piece of evidence seemed to support this. A fisherman turned in a bottle containing a note, allegedly from the Deering's engineer, claiming the ship had been seized by an oil-burning boat, that the crew were handcuffed and being taken away. The note begged whoever found it to inform the Deering Company. For a brief moment, this looked like the missing voice of the lost crew. It even lined up with another report, that after the Deering passed the Cape Lookout lightship, a mystery steamer with its name obscured by canvas had approached and ignored signals. But under examination, the bottle story crumbled. The fisherman eventually admitted he had forged the note, hoping for attention and perhaps a job. The one direct message from the crew turned out to be a hoax. Other rumors pointed to politics. During raids on a communist organization in New York, papers were allegedly found urging radical seamen to seize vessels and sail them to the Soviet Union. In the fever of early Red Scare paranoia, some wondered whether the Deering had been targeted by such a group. There was, however, no real evidence. No sightings of the schooner overseas, no statements from foreign crews, nothing but speculation stacked on fear. When pirates and politics began to seem like weak explanations, investigators turned their gaze back to the ship herself. They already knew Wormel had complained about his crew. They already knew he distrusted his first mate. They already had that crucial image from Cape Lookout, A foreign crewman, not the captain, shouting to the lightship that anchors had been lost. Mutiny, sailors overthrowing their captain, required no outside villains. Just pressure, anger, and a moment of opportunity. If a mutiny did happen, it could explain a lot. The missing captain, the unknown man giving orders, the neat removal of navigational instruments, the controlled lowering of lifeboats. But mutiny raises one more question. If the crew seized the Deering, where did they go afterward? Mutiny fits the ship, but not what happens next, because even mutineers usually leave footprints. Mutiny, if it occurred, would have been just the beginning. Men who overthrow a captain need a plan. They need refuge, money, a way to disappear. Yet in all the ports along the Atlantic, no one ever came forward claiming to have met former Deering crewmen living under new names. No gossip spread among sailors about a bloody takeover aboard a big American schooner. No dying man's confession surfaced decades later in a nursing home. The silence after the Deering is almost as loud as the ship's emptiness itself. One possibility is brutal in its simplicity. If the crew did abandon the Deering in boats, whether as mutineers or simply as frightened sailors who believed the ship was doomed, they may never have made it far enough for anyone to notice. Diamond Shoals is not just a sandbar. It sits where massive forces collide. The Gulf Stream surging north, colder currents sliding south, winds that can switch direction overnight. A small boat launched in winter in those conditions could be carried out to sea surprisingly quickly. A storm doesn't have to smash a lifeboat in full view of the coast to erase it. It only has to roll over it once in the wrong place at the wrong time. In that scenario, the crew's traces wouldn't wash up on the Outer Banks at all. They'd sink hundreds of miles offshore, or drift aimlessly until destroyed, their evidence scattered far beyond any realistic search. It's an explanation that fits the physics. It doesn't satisfy the human part of the mystery, the part that wants a name, a motive, a moment we can point to and say, that's when it happened. What survives instead are fragments. Planks and beams from the dynamited Deering washed ashore and were salvaged by locals. Some of that timber was reused in houses and sheds on the Outer Banks, ordinary structures with quite literally ghost ship bones inside their walls. The Deering's bell and other artifacts ended up in the graveyard of the Atlantic Museum, the last physical pieces of a ship whose story mostly exists in paper and memory now. Her crew left nothing behind that can speak for them. No logbook, no diaries, no letters tucked into a drawer. Just a hole in history where the end of their story should be. The ocean can erase bodies and boats, but it doesn't erase questions. And the questions are starting to outnumber the answers. Decades after the official investigation closed without a firm conclusion, researchers and maritime historians have continued to circle the Deering like a wreck on the charts. Some have revisited weather records, confirming that winter storms were active in the Atlantic, but not necessarily in the exact place and time to neatly explain every missing ship. Others have studied shifting current patterns around Diamond Shoals, modeling how lifeboats could vanish without leaving debris near shore. The Bermuda Triangle crowd has tried to pull the Deering into that larger legend, pointing out her route from Rio would have taken her through the region often associated with strange disappearances. Strictly speaking, though, she grounded north of that typical triangle boundary. The Atlantic off Hatteras doesn't need supernatural labels. It has been drowning sailors long before anyone drew triangles on maps. Which leaves us with something more uncomfortable than a tidy mystery story. An event where natural forces, human decisions, and bad timing might be enough to explain everything, but never quite line up in a way we can prove. Was there a mutiny? The tension between Wormel and his crew suggests it. The foreign crewman shouting at Cape Lookout suggests it. The missing instruments and lifeboats suggest it. Did that mutiny, if it happened, end with those same men swallowed by the ocean they thought they could outsmart? The physics says it's likely. History, however, remains stubbornly blank where their names should be. We are left with a ship we can describe in exquisite detail, and a final act we can only reconstruct in shadows. After all the analysis, we're still stuck with a void right where the ending should be. That unresolved gap is exactly what keeps people hooked on this case. Today, the Carroll A Deering lives on in photographs, museum exhibits, and the stories told to tourists along the Outer Banks. From a distance, she still looks solid in those old black and white images. Tall masts, white hull, a working ship that should be busy with orders and sail lines and men in motion. But the closer you step into her story, the less solid she becomes. Each detail you pick up, an absent captain, a strange course, a meal left untouched, a missing logbook, adds weight. And yet all those details never quite settle into a final, satisfying shape. Maybe that's what truly qualifies her as a ghost ship. Not just that she was found empty, but that her story refuses to anchor itself. We can imagine that last day at sea. A captain pacing, nervous about shoals, and a crew he doesn't fully trust. Men whispering in languages he doesn't understand. Someone quietly checking the lifeboats. Someone else eyeing the weather, wondering if the time to act is running out. And then, somewhere between the Cape Lookout Light and Diamond Shoals, a choice made in the creak of wood and the slap of waves against a hull no one would ever see occupied again. Did they lower the boats at dusk or before dawn? Did Wormel die that night, or did he go over the side with the rest? Just another man in a small boat staring at a coastline that might as well have been another planet? We don't know. We may never know. What we do know is this: a modern, proud schooner ended her career as a silent ruin on a sandbar, her insides neat and waiting as if for a crew that simply stepped out for a moment and never came back. The Atlantic kept its secret, and the world gained one more story about how even the most ordinary voyages can slide sideways into legend. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. There are countless other ships, crews, and expeditions whose endings are just as blurred, just as unsettling, waiting out there in the archives and on the seafloor. If you have a sea mystery, a lost expedition, or a ghost ship you'd like to see covered, you can leave it in the comments section. Like and subscribe, because somewhere on some other coastline, another lookout is already raising a glass to something on the horizon that doesn't look quite right. And when that story finally surfaces, I'll see you in the next one.